Hey, what's up, guys? Okay, so chapter 270 of Fairy Tail 100 Quest is out. Now, before I get into actually reviewing that chapter, I realized that I missed chapter 69, so I'm going to quickly give my thoughts on that chapter and then get into the review. Alright, so I actually thought chapter 69 was just extremely funny in the beginning of it, like seeing everyone react to the fact that they're in Elentier now, and how crazy this world is compared to Earthland. Like, that moment when actually the giant hand just pops out of the ground and they're all freaking out, and Toka and Ferris are just looking at him like, what's going on? Don't you guys have giant hands that just pop out of the ground normally in Earthland too? It's like, no, that does not happen. But it was funny seeing them overreact to that. And then once everything popped off and they all end up getting separated because of the fact of the giant hand, even though usually it seemingly is benevolent and very non-threatening normally on Elentier, for some reason this one attacked them and ended up separating everyone. So now everyone is actually separated. We have Gray and Natsu and Happy together. We have Wendy, Urza, and Charlie together. We have Lucy by herself, and then we don't know what actually ends up happening to Toka and Ferris. We don't know if they're together, if they're separated, if they were captured by Selene. But anyway, yeah, like I said, that chapter was actually really funny in the beginning, and then obviously that was just kind of like the calm before the storm. And now at the end of the chapter, we are getting into what seemingly is going to be the beginning of this arc, fighting off against Selene. Alright, so getting into this week's chapter, first off, we got to start off by talking about that cover page, which is basically just of Laxus and Mirjay basically just walking through an aquarium, seemingly on a date, which I had actually forgotten the fact that this was actually a ship between these two characters. I don't know if this actually is something in the series, but I know that this is actually a fan ship that people have been talking about for a long time now, and I completely forgot about it. So it's actually nice seeing these two characters together. And maybe this is actually Hiro and the artist of this series actually kind of hinting towards maybe these two characters actually might have some kind of connection that we're not seeing off screen. Now, the beginning of the chapter was crazy with Urza and Wendy not being able to do anything against these magical creatures who kind of remind me of the like Infernals from Fire Force, but at the same time honestly not designed just like them, but still kind of creepily moving the way they usually do in that series. And the fact that their attacks were not doing anything to them, like literally every time Urza or Wendy attacked these creatures, they would regenerate, and that was kind of creepy at first. But it kind of reminded me of like just living zombies. Like they, no matter what damage they would do to them, they were still coming at them, kind of like zombies. And I feel like that's kind of the approach that the hero was going for with these creatures, because as we see with Selene's subordinate, who is actually controlling these creatures, who we end up finding out in this chapter is called the Moonlit Beauty God Yoko the Pandemonium. She has this like kind of like Miko Priest theme to her. Like she has the outfit for Miko Priest, and since the fact that she's talking about the yokai energy or yokai abilities and how she's controlling these creatures who are walking around like living ghosts or zombie like creatures who made out of pure magical energy, seems like she has a yokai theme going on to her, and we'll see that kind of repeated with the rest of Selene's subordinates that we see in the chapter. Now, what's interesting is we end up finding out that these creatures actually aren't made of like actual magical energy, because in the Fairy Tail universe, magic uses something called Infernal, I think is how you pronounce the term for it, but it's basically like kind of like the ether from just Eden Zero, where it's basically the source of all of their magical abilities. It's basically the equivalent of mana over in Black Clover. But in order to create these creatures, Yoko's uses something called Superior, which is spirit energy, which we really haven't got any explanation in this chapter as to how that's truly different from the Infernal that they used to use magic. But seemingly with spirit energy, instead of using magical attacks, you would use spirit attacks. And actually, that's actually something that Irene lets Wendy know after her and Urza actually start getting their asses kicked by these creatures. In the chapter, she pops up, which, by the way, the reason why Irene's actually awake now is because of the fact that once they got into Elentier, the overabundance of magical energy that's on the planet actually was enough to wake her up again and basically let her be awake for this moment where Wendy and Urza are being attacked, so that she can give them the advice that they need. And what she ends up telling Wendy is that instead of enhancing her and Urza with her usual magical enhancements, what she should do is use a conceptual enhancement, which is basically just Wendy doing her usual magical enchantments on her and Urza, but instead of using magical energy, she would use spirit energy. Which I actually found really funny that Irene did not tell Wendy exactly how to do this. She said, hey, do this, and then she just popped out. And it took Wendy a second to figure out exactly what she had to do in order to activate that kind of energy. But she eventually found it out. She enhanced her and Urza, and then we'll start kicking their asses. And that's when Yoko showed up and it's like, hey, you guys are kind of interesting. I see why Selene is a little bit interested in you guys. But now it's time to play with the big dogs. And again, keep in mind that Yoko seemingly has a like yokai vibe to her since she is dressed up like a Miko, dressed up like a priestess. And we actually see that theme continue with the next Moonlit Beauty guy that we run into, who was actually called Hakune, who was styled after a Yuki Onna, which if you don't know what that is, that's basically the myth or the Japanese myth for a snow woman, basically a spirit who can kind of control snow. And that's seemingly what she's doing in this chapter when she's going up against Natsu and Gray, where the two of them are kind of just arguing while they're walking through a blizzard. And we end up finding out that it's implied, or at the very least, that she's the one controlling the blizzard and she's going to be their opponent going forward. And you know what? That's actually kind of an interesting matchup, considering the fact that you have Natsu, who uses fire magic, and Gray, who uses ice magic. So the two of them aren't exactly weak to snow abilities, but considering the fact that she obviously is going to end up using superior or spiritual magic or spiritual arts instead of actual magic, maybe due to that, that'll give her the edge over the two of them. Maybe because of the fact that she's using superior, their magical attacks won't have an effect on her or any of the things that she creates to fight them. So again, it's going to be interesting seeing what goes forward for that, because you would think that Natsu and Gray would have the advantage in this fight. But since we don't know exactly what her abilities are just yet, we can't count her out. And then we cut over to Lucy, who's actually walking through a forest with Tauros, who she was actually able to summon, by the way, despite the fact that she doesn't have her spirit keys with her due to the overabundance of magical energy in Elentier. But anyway, Lucy actually ends up running into the final of the Moonlit Beauty gods, Mimi the Unmovable, who if I had to guess, if we were continuing this whole yokai theme with Celine's subordinates, I would have to think it's based off an ogre due to her height and muscular build. And it was actually a very funny moment. Right before she showed up, Tauros actually sensed her coming, so he told Lucy to immediately strip down because he wanted to use her sexy tactic to kind of distract her opponent and catch them off guard. Which Lucy's like, come on now, that never works. And then as soon as Mimi shows up, we see her being very intimidating, and then she gets a quick look down Lucy's cleavage and sees the sweat going down there. And she immediately gets embarrassed. It's like, you're too damn sexy right now. And it's like, man, what would actually happen if Lucy actually lost her clothes in this moment? Would Mimi actually end up just passing out from a nosebleed or something? Like, would this be the first time that Lucy actually won a fight due to fan service? But anyway, guys, that's it for this week's chapter. I'm actually really interested in finding out what's going to happen in the next chapter with these matchups, because now that we have the introduction to Celine's subordinates and finding out that they don't use actual magical attacks, but actually use something called spirit arts, I'm wondering how these matchups are going to go, because again, you would think when it comes to the fight with Hakune, Natsu and Gray would have the advantage due to their magical abilities, but we've already seen with Urza and Wendy that magical attacks don't necessarily work on spirit arts. So I'm interested in seeing how that's going to go down. Are we going to actually end up seeing Natsu and them learning spirit arts on the fly, kind of like how Wendy did in this chapter, and basically adding that to their repertoire? And would that actually end up working when they're back on Earthland? Because this actually could be a way for these 5 characters to power up in on Elentier, basically by learning how to use spirit arts while they're here. But let me know in the comment section down below what you thought about this week's chapter. That's it for the video. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, drop me a like, subscribe to the channel. I would greatly appreciate it. And I will catch you guys with the next video. Peace.